Well, greetings from California. Thank you for the sunshine, by the way. And I want to thank everyone here who has worked so hard to make this annual event possible year after year after year. Um, I bring you greetings to everyone here, to those on live stream, and to those who might be listening to me in a recording. My name is Tim Hammond. I'm Executive Director of the Genital Autonomy Legal Defense and Education Fund in California. It's my honor and pleasure to speak with you today on this, the 14th Annual Worldwide Day of Genital Autonomy. I want to take this opportunity to offer you a long-term perspective on the progress of our movement based on my 35 plus years of working for children's genital autonomy. When I became involved in the struggle against childhood genital cutting in 1989, we were known only as anti-circumcision activists. Today, of course, our struggle is known as the genital autonomy movement, the movement that unapologetically proclaims bodily integrity to be a basic human right, and that every child should grow up with an open future to autonomously decide for themselves how much of their genitals they get to keep. In those early days, the term intactivist did not exist. Many in the general public were uninformed about genital anatomy and the many harms of circumcision. We were seen as lunatics, and people called us fringe. We were laughed at, or worse, we were ignored. And in some cases, we were unjustly labeled anti-Semitic in a feeble attempt to discredit and to silence us, despite the fact that about a third of this movement is composed of thoughtful and compassionate Jews. At that time, the movement was largely concerned with male circumcision and primarily confined to the US, where this highly profitable, medicalized social custom was and still is endemic. No coherent international movement existed. The number of identifiable people leading the US movement could be counted on two hands. The internet was in its infancy, and we communicated by mail, in person, telephone, and by fax. As the movement grew, we found common cause with African women fighting genital mutilation, as well as allies fighting intersex genital mutilation. Today, the movement is truly international, with scores of leaders on several continents and millions of supporters across the globe. For a moment, however, I want to reflect on how I became involved in this international movement, both as a circumcision sufferer and a human rights advocate, and then bring us back to the point of my talk. As some of you know, in 1989, I created the National Organization of Restoring Men and the National Organization to Halt the Abuse and Routine Mutilation of Males. In the years that followed, I produced the first ever social issue documentary to deal with circumcision called Whose Body, Whose Rights. In 1995, that film was broadcast on many television stations, and we received overwhelming acclaim for the documentary. One viewer, however, criticized the film for being one-sided and questioned, can you imagine if they make this a political issue? Now, in 2026, the topic of circumcision has definitely become a political issue. So what happened in those 30 years? Well, I published 3 large-scale surveys of circumcision sufferers and foreskin restorers. Those surveys documented the long-term harm of circumcision to the health and well-being of those affected. Giving a voice to circumcision sufferers is a critical part of our success. In 2011, the San Francisco ballot initiative was launched to ban circumcision. Unfortunately, that was removed by the courts, but it was still the first such effort to appear on a voter ballot. Here in Germany in 2012, as was mentioned earlier, for the first time in history, a district court judge in Köln ruled that male circumcision constitutes illegal bodily harm, and that child's fundamental human right to bodily integrity and self-determination outweighs parental rights and religious freedom. And today we proudly commemorate this landmark event. However, as we all know, the Bundestag bowed to political pressure from religious groups and passed legislation to make infant circumcision legal. At that point, German politicians shamefully abdicated their duty to enforce international human rights and violated Article 3 of the German Constitution that calls for men and women to have equal rights. In 2013, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe passed a resolution that classified ritual male circumcision as, quote, a violation of the physical integrity of children and a violation of human rights. Then, in 2015, in the UK, Sir James Mundy, in a case involving circumcision of a brother and a sister, declared that male circumcision causes significant bodily harm. A few years later, in 2018, children's rights advocates in Iceland lobbied their legislators to pass legislation to protect all children equally from genital cutting customs. The Icelandic parliament, however, failed to pass the legislation. That same year, in the US, a federal court declared that our federal statute against female genital mutilation was unconstitutional based on Federalist grounds. It was rewritten by Congress in 2020, but in declaring the original law to be unconstitutional, District Judge Bernard Friedman stated, quote, as laudable as the prohibition of a particular type of abuse of girls may be, it does not logically further the goal of protecting children on a non-discriminatory basis. Also in Denmark, in 2018, a citizens' initiative was introduced to make the existing anti-FGM law there gender neutral, so that all children could be protected from genital cutting. The Danish parliament rejected that in 2021. In 2022, I created the Genital Autonomy Legal Defense and Education Fund, or called GELDEF, to educate and organize attorneys to challenge the legality of infant circumcision and to raise money to pay for court cases. I'm proud to say that we've produced numerous resources to educate attorneys about the fundamental human right of children to bodily integrity and the need for gender-neutral laws to protect all children from genital cutting. In that same 4-year period, we have set aside $90,000 for future court costs. Intact Global was founded in 2024 by attorney Eric Klopper, and in 2025, his law firm filed the first ever legal challenge in the state of Oregon for violating that state's constitutional guarantee of equal protection based on sex when it passed its anti-FGM law that protected only female children, leaving male and intersex children at risk of non-therapeutic, non-consensual genital cutting. This year, Intact Global will file a second legal challenge in the state of Colorado because its anti-FGM law also violates the state constitutional guarantee of equal protection based on sex. And finally, the Health Equity Campaign, the political arm of Intaction, is right now working with lobbyists in New York State and in Washington, D.C. to educate legislators about the need to stop Medicaid funding of medically unnecessary newborn circumcision. But as I reflect on the failed political efforts that took place in Germany, Iceland, and Denmark between 2012 and 2021, where the vast majority of the population supports equal protection for all children, I ask myself, who intimidated the politicians to oppose protective legislation? In some cases, it was pressure from influential religious groups or perceived threats of religious violence. In other cases, the intimidation came from powerful governments like Israel and the United States. In fact, the US State Department, acting as the self-appointed global guardian of so-called religious freedom, exerted diplomatic pressure on those parliaments of those countries, especially Denmark. In every case, the so-called guardians have proven themselves to be the opponents of children's rights, and the politicians who could have protected children have shown themselves to be cowards. These are all unmistakable signs that children's genital autonomy has indeed become a political issue, especially when powerful individuals, organizations, and even governments oppose the will of the people. A lot has happened in 35 years. We and the general public and a growing number of politicians know that we are not a fringe movement, but a vanguard of reasonable and compassionate human rights advocates who care about the most vulnerable among us, the children. Going forward, what do these new political realities tell us about forced childhood genital cutting and gender equality? It means that everyone who supports children's genital autonomy, all of us, must be more proactive in dealing with our legislators. We must write letters, make phone calls, visit, and talk with our legislators to help them understand how children are harmed by forced genital cutting. Under the law, the shape of your genitals shouldn't matter. We all have different bodies, and we all deserve the same rights. Yet, politics has always been a numbers game that reflects who is heard and who is ignored. And I guarantee you that there are those hearing my words today who take the issue of children's genital autonomy seriously enough to press forward to a political victory. Everyone who considers themselves to be a circumcision sufferer or a foreskin restorer or someone who knows and loves someone harmed by circumcision must come out. Share your lived experiences with family, friends, and politicians. The world changes when you make your voices heard. Thank you.